Hello everyone. In this video we are going to cover basics of programming and Python. Let's start with why you should learn programming. One of the reasons is the current demand in the market. An entry-level Python developer earns around $85,000 per year in the US. And it can easily go up to $200,000 for mid-level developers in bigger companies. Most companies do not require a college degree either. Another reason is possibility to start your own business. You can create your own website or mobile application and it can be the next big thing. Or you can just automate some of your day-to-day work and save yourself some time. Sounds cool, but why Python? Python is relatively easier to understand for absolute beginners. The things you'll learn here directly applies to other programming languages. After learning the fundamentals, you can either continue with another language or go with more advanced concepts in Python. Why this course while there are millions of others? So for this one you need absolutely zero background, and it's a hands-on course. You'll find coding exercises and projects to make sure you understand the concepts before moving to the next sections. Programming is easy to learn if you feel moving forward and stay motivated. For this reason, we won't go into things like what's a compiler or interpreter, how to set up the environment and your editor, or how to install Python. We won't waste a couple of days with this. Instead, we'll spend our time and energy to learn programming itself. I'll provide a link below so that you can just click and start coding. I'll be using the same tool in this video as well. Let's start with what is code, or what is source code. In simple terms, it's a letter that's understandable by computers. Similar to how you read a letter line by line and understand what it says, computers read the code line by line and understand what's written on each line. You can write a letter in English, French, or any other language. Similarly, there are different programming languages that you can write your code. Some examples are Python, Java, C++, and JavaScript. There are differences between different programming languages, but after learning one, it's quite easy to learn others because fundamentals are the same. Let's say you are in a phone call, and someone is telling you a phone number. You would ask them to wait in order to get a pen and a piece of paper, and you would write it down to remember it later. That's exactly what a variable is, a piece of paper that you can write some information. Then why do we call it a variable, you might ask? Because it can change. You can always erase the content and put a new one. If you keep writing down things, you'd end up with a bunch of information on a bunch of papers. How would you know which information belongs to whom? You can give names to these papers to remember what kind of information you are storing, and get the correct paper later on when you need it. Instead of storing the information on paper, this is how it would look if you store it in a variable. Mike age equals to 35. You write the variable name on the left and its value on the right. Then put an equal sign in between. Now Mike age variable has value of 35. Unlike the traditional equal sign you might remember from your elementary school, here it's used as an assignment operator. It assigns the value on the right into the variable on the left. Probably you choose different paper types if you are drawing, writing a song, or working with mathematical expressions. Similarly, when you define variables, computer will store it differently based on its type. So, each variable has a type, even though you don't write or see it explicitly in Python. If you are storing a number, you put the variable name on the left and the number on the right. But if you are storing a text, you put the value on the right side in quotes. By using quotes around the value, you are telling computer that you need a variable to store a text, not a number or any other type. This type is called string. Now you know the two main types in Python, numbers and strings. First exercise is about defining numbers, and the second one is about defining strings. Please don't forget using quotes while defining strings. Please make sure you pause the video here and solve it yourself first. So the first question is asking us to define a year variable and put the current year inside, which is 2021. So what we are doing is we are putting the variable name on the left hand side and the value on the right hand side. And we are putting an equal sign in between so that we can put this value into this variable. So the next one is asking us define a city variable and put the city you live in inside and store it in this variable. So the same approach, we put the variable name on the left and the value on the right. And the important note here is, since this is a string, or you can think it like this is a text, you need to use quotes here. So if you don't put the quotes and if you run it like this, so you'll get an error. So make sure you are putting the quotes around the value so that you don't get any error from Python. Usually you write code for some people to use it. It can be a website, a mobile application, or a Python program. While computer is executing your Python code line by line, users wouldn't see anything unless you print something to the screen. This is exactly where print method comes in handy. It lets you to write something into the screen for your users to see. It can be a greeting message or any other information. You can write a value directly to the screen by calling print method. You can print a number. If you pass 123 to the print method, it will print 123 to the screen. Or you can print a string. For example, you can give hello in quotes to the print method and it will print hello to the screen. Instead of passing values, you can also pass a variable. You can define an age variable and assign 35 to it. When you pass age variable to the print method, it will print the value of the age variable to the screen, which is 35 in this case. So the first and second exercises are similar to the previous one, but this time we are printing them to the screen. Third exercise will show you can change value of a variable. So don't forget solving this question by yourself before moving on to the solution. So the first one is asking us define an age variable and set its value to your age, which is 30, and it's asking us to print this variable. So we are using print method and parentheses, then we are saying age. So here we put 30 into age variable, and in the next line we are printing the value of age variable. So let's run this code and see what happens. So as you can see, since we use the print method, we see 30 here. What happens if we don't print it? As you can see, there is nothing written to the output. To see something in the output, we need to print this value, or we need to print this variable. Now we'll see the content or the value of this variable. So second one is asking us to define a first name variable and put a name inside. Let's use Mike, and here we are assigning Mike value into first name variable, and we need to print this. So please note we are using quotes here around the value. It's not just Mike, but we are putting Mike within quotes and assigning it to this variable. Now this variable will hold this value inside, and when we print, it will just print what's stored in this variable, which is Mike. So if we run this again, as you can see, first it executed this part because it's going line by line. It assigns the value, prints age, it assigns the first name, and then prints the first name, as you can see here. So the third one is slightly similar. So we are defining a first name variable again. I mean, you can ignore this part maybe and just focus on the last part. So we are defining a first name variable, putting Mike inside, and then it's telling us to print it. And then it's telling us set its value to some other name. So let's assign like something like Jack, and let's print the first name again. So just to prevent confusion, let's remove this part and run this code. As you can see, it's executing line by line again. So first name is Mike, and when we print it, you'll see Mike here. And it's the same variable name on the left, but we are assigning a different value. That's why they are called variables. So you can just keep assigning different values. And when we print it here, it will print Jack this time. Now let's make things a bit more interesting. Instead of assigning values to variables directly, let's ask user to input a value from keyboard. You can easily achieve this by using input method. Similar to how print method takes a value from your code and sends it to the user or their screen, input method kind of works the other way. It asks user to enter a value and brings it into your code. When computer sees input method in your code, it stops there and waits for user to submit a text. When user types in and presses enter, it's returned back to your code and assigned into the variable on the left hand side. Just one important note here. Whenever you use input method, the value returned from the user will be treated as string. Even if you are asking for age and user types only numbers, computer will still think it's a string. If you want to store it as a number, you can use int method. It will turn the given variable into a number, specifically integer. You might be wondering why you care to store it as a number instead of a string. But don't worry, you'll understand it in the following sections. So first one is a simple exercise to get used to using input method. Second one is also straightforward, but try converting it to a number before printing. So the third exercise is similar to the previous section. It shows you can change value of a variable multiple times. Make sure you solve the question by yourself before moving on to the solution. So the first question is telling us, ask user to enter a name and then print it. As you can remember, we use input method to ask an input from the user. And let's say, please enter your name. So this text will be printed to the screen so that user can understand like they need to enter something and what kind of information they should enter. So this is just like any string we can provide here. It will be just printed in the output for user's convenience. And once user types in and presses enter, the value they provided will be sent back to our code, and we want to store it in a variable. And then the question is asking us print this name they provided. So while computer is executing this code, it will first execute the first line, and since it will see the input method, it will just wait there till user enters an input. And as soon as they enter, it will be assigned into this variable, and it will move to the next line, which will print the name and whatever value they provided. So let's run this code. So as you can see, the text we provided here, it will show up here. So please enter your name. Now let's enter Mike. And when I press enter, so let's see what happened here. So we ask something to the user and they entered the value and pressed enter. So this is actually the first line here. In the next line, we printed that value, which is this one. And this is how input and print method kind of works. Input method will get a value from the user and bring it into your code. And the print method will basically take whatever you provide in your code and take it to the screen for user to see. So let's move to the second question. So this time we'll ask user to enter their age. So it's slightly similar. Please enter your age. And we can just print this, which will work. But since this one is returning a string, what we can do is we can use int method and give age here. So once we give age into int method, it will take that text or string and convert it into an integer, which is a number. So let's assign this to another variable. Let's call it age number. And just to make it implicit, let's say this is age string. And then we are printing the age number. So we're asking user to input their age and assigning it to age string, because you don't need to write string here, but just for being explicit. So it will be stored in this variable, and then we'll take that one and convert it into an integer and assign it into age number variable. Then we'll just print it. So let's run this one. Please enter your name, Mike, and then please enter your age, 30. So as you can see, it first executed the first part from the first question, and then the second part from the second question. Okay, let's move to the third one, which is slightly similar. So it's telling us define a first name variable and set it to your first name. Let's use Mike again here, and it's telling us to print it. And then ask user to enter a name and store it in the same first name variable. So it's telling us use input method, ask user to enter a name and assign it back to the same variable we defined above, and then print it again. So let's remove the first two questions. As you can see, either like as a developer, we can assign some values into variables, and then we can just change the value of that variable into something provided by the user. So let's run this. And this time let's use Jack again. So again, Python is executing everything line by line. First it assigns Mike into first name, then it prints it, which you can see here. Then it's asking user to enter a value with this one, as you can see here, and user is providing Jack, and in the next line we are printing that first name, which is storing Jack this time and printing this value here. Comments are a very important part of programming. Unlike computers, we cannot execute or understand the code as we read. Some parts might be complicated to understand for us, especially when written by others. Or maybe it's been a while since we wrote that code and now we need to change some parts of it. Adding commands will help us, developers, understand the code faster, even after checking the code many years later. You can put a hash sign at the beginning of a line to turn that line into a comment. Again, commands are for us, developers, not computers. Computer will skip the commented lines without even executing them. One other common usage of comment is disabling some parts of the code. When you don't want to remove it completely, you can comment it out to let computer skip that part. When you have two print statements, one in each line, and you comment out the second one, computer will skip the second print call and just print the first one to the screen. If you need it later on, you can just uncomment it. Now computer will print both numbers. This exercise will show you when you put a hash sign at the beginning of a line, Python will skip it and won't execute. Okay, question is telling us print hello in the first line, remember using quotes, and world in the second line. And run the code and check the printed value. Let's see. As you can see, we see hello and the world because we have two print statements and Python will execute first line and the second line. And then question is telling us comment out the second print by putting a hash sign at the beginning. Your editor will show you by kind of using a grayed out color that this line is commented when you put a hash sign at the beginning. And let's run this again. So this time Python printed hello to the output. And since there's a hash sign here, it just skipped the like whatever written here. We can even put some random stuff, run it. Nothing, because this line is basically ignored by Python. Most likely, arithmetic operators are something you already know. It's not any different in programming. we have addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and modulo. Modulo might be the one you might not remember. It's the remainder of a division. So if you divide 5 by 3, remainder would be 2. You can store the result of an operation in a variable. Or you can even use variable in the operation itself. You can say result equals to 5 plus 2, which will assign 7 into result variable. Then you can say final result equals to result plus 3. Since result was 7, final result will be set to 10. Or you can even use the same variable on both sides. Remember, equal sign is just an assignment operator. It doesn't mean left hand side and right hand side are equal. It means calculate the right hand side and assign it into the variable on the left hand side. So after assigning 5 plus 2 into result variable, you can say result equals to result plus 3. Right hand side will be 7 plus 3, which is 10. And value of result variable will be set to 10. As we just learned, plus sign sums up the given numbers. Let's see what happens if we use strings instead of numbers. When you define first name and last name variables and write first name plus last name, instead of addition, Python will do a string concatenation. It will add one string after another. You can also add multiple strings together. You can do something like first name plus white space plus last name to add a white space between first and last name. Now it will look better with a white space between first and last name. In the first one, we'll make a simple arithmetic operation and print the result. And the second one is about how string concatenation works in Python. Make sure you solve the question before moving on to the solution. So the first question is telling us define a variable and assign a value to it. So let's say my lucky number equals to 10. And it's telling us multiply it by 3. So if you remember, multiplication is done by this star sign. And if we do this, it will multiply lucky number with 3. But the problem is it will just multiply and basically we are not doing anything with the value because there's nothing kind of on the left side or there's no equal sign. So don't remember to assign this back to our variable basically. So here what we are saying is we are assigning lucky number, we are assigning 10 into our lucky number and then we are multiplying it by 3. And then the value you calculate here will be assigned into the variable on the left hand side, which is lucky number again, which means here the lucky number is 10 and here it will be 30. So let's print it. And let's run it. So as you can see, we print 30. So let's move to the next one. So it's telling us define a variable named city and store the city you live in this variable, which is Vancouver for me. And then it says define a variable called country and also put the country, which is Canada. And now it's telling us print the city and country separated by a comma. So we can either directly print it or we can just define a new variable just to see it easily. So what we are going to do is we'll say city plus country. And let's see how this will look. And let's remove this part. And let's also print the output here. So as you can see, it just took the first string and put the second string just after that one. Since we wanna put a comma in between, what we do is we put a new string which just has comma, and we kind of use plus sign between all these strings and run this. So this time, as you can see, it took the Vancouver and then added comma here next to it, and then it appended the Canada here. I mean, this is same with doing something like this. You can just do this, which will do the first concatenation, and you can say something like output equals to output plus country. So if you execute this line by line, you define city, country, and in this line, you are assigning Vancouver, comma, into output variable. And the next line, now output variable is Vancouver, comma, as you can see here. And then we are appending country, value of the country variable, which is Canada, and assigning it back to the output and then printing it. So if we run, as you can see, we have the same result. So this project is kind of trying to test everything we learned so far. Okay, the question is kind of 3 parts, and let's solve each part separately and also add some comments for each part to remember what we are doing for that specific part. So the first part is getting their first name, last name, and their year of birth. So getting the input from the user. So we simply use input method here to get the name, enter your first name, and we'll assign this into first name variable. And then we do the same for last name. Enter your last name, and we'll do the same for year of birth. Okay, at this point we collected everything we need, and we can move to the next part, which is calculating the age. So we know year of birth, we know the current year, we know how to calculate the age out of those two. So we'll say age equals to current year is 2021, and we'll subtract year of birth out of that. Or we can do something like current year and put that one here, which is the same thing, but it might make it easier to understand. And let's just to see if everything works so far, let's print the age variable and run this code. So let's put 2000 for the year of birth and expect to see age as 21. And we get an error here. So basically it's telling us you are using subtraction with an integer and a string. So it might not be obvious initially, but actually the problem is exactly here. So the current year defined here, it's a number. There's no quotes around the value. It's a number basically. But actual problem is with year of birth. If you remember from the previous sections, input method always returns the value as a string. Even if user is just entering numbers, it still returns a string. So here, this is a string, this is a number. When you try to do subtraction, it just fails. And again, if you remember the method we used in the previous section to convert this string into a number, which was int method. So we'll give year of birth into this int method, and it will return the numerical value or integer back to us. And let's assign it to year of birth number, let's say. Okay, now we give the string here. We get it from the user first, then we give it here, and this will return a number assigned to this one. Now we can use that one here. And if we run this again, now we saw 21 here, so everything works perfectly. Okay, let's move to the last part, which is the printing all these values. So basically just to see the format we want. So from the question it asks us something like this. Hello John Doe, exclamation mark. You are 35 years old. Okay, let's also break this into two. First, let's try to build this part and then this part. So the name output, let's call it like this. So what we are doing is we'll do hello, which is a string, and we need a white space after that. And then we'll put the full name. We can either create it here by saying first name plus white space plus last name, or we can just do something like this to make it easier to understand. So we'll do full name equals to first name and a white space and a last name. So now that we have the full name, we can just use it in the next line. So hello white space plus full name. And then we also want an exclamation mark at the end. So this is another string and its content is just an exclamation mark. So name output will be something like this after executing these two lines. And now let's move to the next part. Age output. So again, we'll say you are white space and we'll put age here. And then we'll put another white space, which is for this part. And we'll say years old. And what we want to do is we want to print name output, which is printing this part, and the age output will print kind of this part, and we need a white space in between. So we'll just do something like this. So there are different methods to make string concatenation easier, but we won't go into details for those methods just yet. So just use plus sign for the time being. Alright, let's see if this will work. So Mike Watson 2000. So we got another exception or another error here. So this time error looks similar to the previous one we got, but this time it's slightly different. So it's saying here, so before we were trying to do an arithmetic operation here by using a number and a string, even though it requires two numbers. And we had to convert this one into a number before doing this. But for this case, we are doing a string concatenation. So we have quotes here, which means these are strings, and we are doing a string concatenation. But actually, age variable is not a string, it's a number. So if you see it here, we are subtracting one number from another one, and this is also becoming a number. And because of that, it's complaining you are trying to do string concatenation, but you used an integer here. And similar to int method, we also have a method called str, so string, something like this. So this will take whatever variable you give or whatever value you give here and turn that into a string. And now, just to show it like this, so instead of having 21, which is an integer, it will create something like this, which is a string. And Python will kind of convert this into 21, and now everything is a string. All right, let's remove this print statement. And let's try running this again. Oops, we forgot quotes here. So since we put quotes here, Python thought that this is just a string and it didn't try evaluating what's inside. It just printed it exactly here. So if we remove the quotes and run it again. So as you can see, we get what we want. Hello Mike Watson, exclamation mark, you are 21 years old. So there are many different ways of solving this question. This is just the way I solved it. So as long as you get the expected output, you are fine. So that's all for this section. Thanks everyone for watching the video. We tried covering basics of programming and Python. And if you have any questions or comments, just use the comment section below and I'll try answering. And see you in the next video.